You can do it. Yeah, yeah, kids pose. Yeah. I can bring it forward. Yeah.
And I was like sitting for hours on end. It's like a sibling is like, I need you because I've been there, like, right, that's weird. Yeah, but it's just like, I like to just like, I love the repetition, like I get lost in my own thoughts, like that's
You can start and I'll make sure.
And then, but then sometimes like I'll listen to some more start writing a song, and I'm like, alright, I have to get myself in this mood because I hate this music right now.
Okay, hello everyone, we're going to start. So thank you all for coming. It's a great honor to have Dr. Faiyaz here with us. So a little bit about the event today. The alienation of Shia Muslim and Muslim communities has been a tale as old as time. We navigate educational institutions. I believe it's crucial to be aware and understand the experiences that many youth experience today. On this campus alone, identity is a huge aspect UCR celebrates, and it's crucial that in this process of celebration, we educate ourselves and others on the discrimination Shia Muslims face on a daily basis. I'm incredibly grateful that we have an opportunity to have him here today. And just a little bit about Dr. Faiyaz. He's a research scholar for the Islamic Center at New York University and Associate Chaplain for the Center of Global and Spiritual Life at NYU. He holds a doctorate in education from New York University with a focus on the identity development of Shia youth in the US. Pursuing the classical course of Islamic education, he studied in the Seminary of Karbala, Iraq, one of the most prominent centers for Islamic learning. Due to the political and social climate, he has been making strides in the greater New York area by taking part in several interfaith seminars and discussions with the goal of increasing dialogue with faith leaders. In 2019, Dr. Sheikh Jaffer co-founded Pillars of Peace, a nonprofit established in order to address a gap in appropriate services for survivors of domestic and gender-based violence from all backgrounds, and in particular Muslim communities. In addition to his roles at NYU's Islamic Center, Dr. Sheikh Faiyaz Jaffer serves as the Adjunct Assistant Professor of Public Service of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service, where he teaches courses on Islamic law and Islamic spirituality, and his research has appeared in many academic journals. So it's my great honor to welcome
How are the flowers?
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Omar Aziz. I'm the director for the Middle Eastern Student Center. So great to see you all here today for this wonderful event. If you're not aware, the Middle Eastern Student Center is one of 9 ethnic and gender resource centers here at UC Riverside, and probably the first center of its kind in the country. So we're very lucky to have events like this to be able to hold, to highlight different communities that exist. These different communities that exist across the Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, North African diasporas. So we're very honored to have Dr. and Sheikh Faiyaz Jaffer here today. I was letting him know before he came how impressed I am with the work that ICNYU is doing, the Islamic Center of New York University, because really leading the way of what it looks like to be create an inclusive Muslim institution within the university especially. So it's been really amazing. Thanks for coming. I hope your travel wasn't too bad coming to California.
I made it. The weather is beautiful. So makes it a little better to see the sun. And
good. Awesome.
Thanks again for having me.
Of course. Yeah. So if it's okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So I have kind of a list of questions we'll go through, and then we'll have some time at the end for folks in the audience for whatever questions you might have as well. And we'll make sure to have some of Habibi's tacos coming in before we leave today. So my first question to start is just a lightning round question of, can you tell us your life story in about 2 minutes?
2 minutes, okay. Probably the most kind of formative moment in my youth or upbringing was probably 9/11. So we won't go back to my birth and all that fun stuff. I was in the 9th grade, to give you all my date and age and all that good stuff. And like you all know, kids in the 9th grade are pretty mean. I went to a graduating class of 550 students. I can count the number of minorities on my fingers. So it was heavily like white, And there was no experience that is like more clear in my memory than the morning of September 12th, that Wednesday morning. It was the worst day of my life. I can say, now, so many years after that incident, probably just how that I was bullied, it was horrific. And I think every single day thereafter, I dreaded like going to school. Obviously, I'm not going to go and like be a snitch and tell my teachers or whatever what people are saying. And I wasn't going to go home and tell my parents either. It was a really, really kind of awful time. I say all of this because what I experienced on those days immediately after 9/11, ninth grade, and really throughout high school, it really started to marinate, I guess you can say, in my mind, like what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I wanted to, get into politics. I wanted to, do advocacy work. I wanted to figure out ways to support like Muslims in America. But I quickly realized that I was not primed to do so because I was so fixated on answering every question that I was being asked by my peers. Why do Muslims oppress women? Why do you kill yourselves? Every single possible, insult, Islamophobic rhetoric, I heard it during the course of those days, because kids in the ninth grade don't have any filter. And instead of like pursuing a path in that advocacy work that I thought that I was going to when I started my undergrad, I realized I wanted to spend the majority of my time answering all of those like theological questions. And I realize my 2 minutes is probably already up. But,
That's okay.
So I kind of entered into the stage of like curiosity, right? So I would try to like read as much as I could, and back then we didn't have like fast internet like you all have these days. So I'd look up things online, and quickly I realized that like this curiosity was taking me to like a really good place.
So you're saying going online, searching things about Islam took you to a good place?
Believe it or not, because I couldn't find any like legit material that day, right? 15 plus years ago. And so I would like ask my mom, I would ask my dad, I would ask like everyone that I could, and like a lot of the answers I was getting I wasn't totally satisfied with. So 18, 19 years old now, and contrary to like what other 18, 19 year folks are like engaging in, I would literally go to the library, like be like the nerd that I was, and literally try to find like answers to these questions in a way that would get like non-Muslims to digest what is the reality of like my religious tradition. At the same time, 18, 19 years old, you're looking for like a sense of belonging, you're looking for like friends, you're looking for a community, especially being, in this high school experience, no Muslims, no brown people, like I couldn't find people who were similar to me. I thought that I was going to find that like in my, undergrad campus. And I remember first Friday prayers, like we perform within Muslim tradition. I go to like the, Muslim Student Association, like prayer room. There's like 500 people like, gathering together for like this prayer on Friday. And, I'm Shia Muslim, and we prostrate on what is known as a turba, which is a stone, because we have to pray like on a surface that comes from earth. And it's a very like clear symbol of like Shia tradition or Shia practice. I put it on the ground, this guy on my right, this guy on my left, and start talking to each other in a language that I don't understand. And after a minute and a half, they tell me, they're like, hey man, like you can't be praying here because you're making the entire prayer room impure. And I was like really like upset. I literally picked up my prayer stone. I like went to another room and I prayed there. And for the first 2.5 years of my undergrad career, I'd pray like in stairwells, in the library, or in our humanities building, because I realized that I couldn't have like a good experience in my high school, and now I'm around Muslims who literally treat me worse than those folks in high school did. And so all of these like experiences are really these two in specific. The morning of September 12th, as well as my first Friday as an undergrad, are like these two moments that if I connect them together, I think like they really drive a lot of what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And would you say that moment that you had at the prayer, the Friday prayer in college, was that the first time you felt that difference between, you know, being Shia Muslim and kind of feeling outcast from the wider Muslim community? What's kind of that first moment you felt that?
No, I mean, I had undoubtedly felt it and experienced it in like different pockets, you know, in my upbringing, in my childhood. But that was the first one that I had experienced in the United States. A lot of these would take place, you know, when we perform pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, and people look at us differently and they say things that are really horrific. You know, I had gone, my grandparents, to go and you know, visit like other countries and see other like religious sites and so on. And so I had that experience and I had that understanding, and I knew like obviously who I was, and I sort of recognized that I was this minority within this, you know, larger Muslim majority. But that moment was the first, I think, experience that was very clear and direct into my face. And I think it came at a time when I was looking for community, you know? Of course, only now, you know, that I've studied Muslim community or that I work with Muslim students on a day-to-day basis in my work, I realized why that bothered me so much, right? You know, at this formative period in someone's life as like an undergrad student, you are almost innately looking for community, right? Where you're trying to figure out who you are. And I thought that I had it. I was waiting for the day that I can get out of high school and, you know, distance myself from that environment that I was in so that I can find people who are like me, who look like me, who have similar experiences to me. Remember, we all experienced 9/11 the same way, right? We all experienced 9/12 the same day, so to say. And then for them to act that way, I think I couldn't figure it out. You know, I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much. But now it makes total sense.
Did it come as a surprise to you?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's probably, you know, it shouldn't have come as a surprise to me. Yeah, I think that's one of the most. Again, I think that it's so central in my mind, and I can, you know, I remember the details of that afternoon so clearly, probably because of how shocked I was what I had just experienced.
So you talked about kind of your background and the work that you've done. You've studied religion and studied it in many different capacities. Could I ask you a little bit about when people ask you the difference between Shia and Sunni Islam, like when someone asks you, well, what's the difference? What do you say? And do you answer that differently depending on who's asking you? Like if somebody's not Muslim, do you answer that differently than you might answer to somebody who is Muslim? So yeah, what do you say when somebody asks you, what's the difference between these two sects of Islam?
For sure. I mean, I think it always starts with, you know, who my audience is or what the crowd is or who the one who's asking. You know, and I think that the most important sort of like bullet point that I consistently address that's universal to whoever's asking the question is to start off the conversation by explaining that Islam in the way that you likely understand it is like this normative, like Sunni version of Islam, you know? And I know people are gonna get upset about this, but there is like this notion of Sunni privilege in the way that we learn, in the way that we study, in the way that we perceive Islamic tradition or Muslim practice in this country or elsewhere. And so the version of Islam that you are asking about is probably you're trying to understand like what is Shia Islam, because you probably already know what Sunni Islam is, you know? Yeah. And so to start off and, you know, break that down for folks is really, really important. And then when I'm explaining Shia Islam, be it its theology, its jurisprudence, its ethics, its spirituality, whatever one of these buckets, you know, that we speak about when we're trying to understand any given religious tradition, it's important to understand that the way that I have to consistently present it is in contrast to normative like Islam, Sunni Islam, right? So it's Shias believe this, the Sunnis believe this. And the first question that I'm gonna get is, well, why do Shias believe that? Well, you know, we're not asking why do Sunnis believe that, right? Because the normative, foundational, prototype Islam is Sunni Islam, you know, in the way that most people perceive it. I was in Connecticut 2 weeks ago, and I was asked to give a talk by this institution called the Muslim Coalition of Connecticut, for instance. they have under their umbrella like various different, mosques across the state, and Sunnis and Shias, and at the end of the day, like they're trying to do like really meaningful work, engage in community service, and so on and so forth. They asked me to come and give a talk like on Shia like theology and practice, keeping in mind that the majority is obviously like a Sunni demographic. And as I'm like going through like my slides and I'm giving this presentation and I'm talking through, at the end someone comes up to me who's like one of like their really important like members. I know it's being recorded, but I guess it is what it is now. He comes up to me afterwards and he's like, I can't believe that you came and you gave like a 45-minute presentation and you didn't like present like any opinions of like what Sunnis believe on these matters. So I was like, well, you guys invited me and you asked me to speak like on Shia theology and practice, right? So that's what I was doing, and I was trying to do it like in a unapologetic, like very, this is what we believe, and this is what we don't believe, and whatever. It's like, why do I need to consistently speak to my tradition or speak to this tradition and then compare it to what you understand? And he's like, well, you make a good point, but at the end of the day, we're the majority. Well, that's exactly the point, right? That is exactly the point. It's really, really hard for you to digest that. But I'm not telling you to believe this. I'm just telling you what it is that we believe. At the end of the day, why should anyone feel threatened by that? And I think again because it goes against the norm, right? Which is this is the dominant, and everything that is not the dominant is the non-dominant, and so you should explain it in light of the dominant.
And so there's this feeling that you have, if you don't include it, that somehow it's not valid. Or every time you talk about Shia, you have to also talk about Sunni Islam every time that it comes up.
Every time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And what do you feel like are the challenges that you see like Shia Muslim Americans facing today, and in particular like our college students? Because I know you've lived it, you've researched it, and you work with students today. So what do you see as some of the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, even before I get into those challenges, and there are plenty, and I'm sure the students who identify as Shia can speak to that, with detail and with experience as well. To keep in mind that like our experiences in institutions of higher education, as well, are oftentimes a microcosm of that which takes place external to the campus. Why I love working in university is because it was diversity. Why I love working in university is because of the conversations that we're able to have like very clearly and openly. And oftentimes a university in any given state, in any given city, in any given community is again oftentimes a microcosm of that which is external to like campus life. And so you can't divorce the Shia experience, Shia Muslim experience in America, from the Shia Muslim student experience in America, so to say. And why I say that is, if you take a look at, the Shia Muslim experience in the United States, it hasn't been 1 year where there were 4 individuals who were killed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in an episode of Shia phobia, anti-Shia sentiment during Muharram, which is a really, really important time within the Muslim calendar and within Muslim practice and tradition. So we're talking about violence that literally takes people's lives. And all of that is manifested by the way that we speak and the way that we act, right? And we realize that our microaggressions, our language, our lack of speaking up consistently lead to real challenges and issues for people, oftentimes of minority backgrounds. The perpetrator was Muslim who committed the crime, and he killed like Shia Muslims, or those we thought were Shia Muslims. 3 of them did identify as Shia, and the other one had a Shia name, so to say, which is why this episode clearly took place. Now, how does that like resonate with like students in institutions of higher education? I give you one experience that was my own, but I'm certain that there are Shia Muslim students in this gathering, those who are listening online, those who have lived their religion and practiced it openly in the way that they do, for no other like apparent reason other than to just fulfill their duties and their religious obligations. They're just trying to do like what they know best. And they've been, you know, treated harshly via language, microaggressions, or even, you know, verbal or physical like assault, God forbid. That's a reality on a day-to-day basis. When I speak this experience of, you know, attending that Friday prayer or praying in the stairwell of a library or the humanities building for, you know, close to 3 years of my 4 years on, you know, as an undergrad, I consistently see students in the gatherings that I say this in, like nodding their head. Dozens of them who come to me afterwards is like, hey, you know what happened to me? This happened to me, exactly like my experience. And others whose experiences are far worse, you know, unfortunately. You know, where most, you know, Muslim student associations, Muslim student groups on American college campuses, they're oftentimes like very male dominated. They're oftentimes very like, you know, Desi dominated. They're oftentimes very like Sunni dominated. Oftentimes anyone who's outside of these three like main buckets, they immediately feel like marginalized and isolated. And that's really, really unfortunate because this is like meant to be a place where young people are looking to find belonging, they're looking to find community, they're looking to grow, they're looking to learn, so on and so forth. And so realize and recognize that if you are in like these positions of privilege, that you are literally hindering someone's opportunity for growth just by the way that you look at them, by the way that you talk to them, by our lack of sort of a welcoming attitude. So experiences are challenging, they're rough. I'll give you this quick like statistic. When I started working at New York University 6 or 7 years ago, we had approximately 10 to 15 Shia Muslim student groups on American college campuses in the country. Today, there's probably 80 or 90, you know, and maybe even like close to 110 now, if I'm not mistaken, which to me is like a huge like growth and like amazing success. And you know, and whenever I get really prideful about this number, and I know, you know, I was involved in a lot of them, so I feel, you know, really happy to see that. The first question that I get asked, oftentimes by like, you know, a Sunni student is like, well, why do they need to create their own like student group? You know, Muslim Student Association, the MSA is not a Sunni, you know, we don't call it the Sunni Muslim student group, right? It's like, okay, well, you know, oftentimes again, where we're co-opting language, Muslim in this country automatically means Sunni Muslim, you know, for most people. And again, not everyone. And it's totally fine for us to, you know, to work independently, but also work together, or to practice independently, but then work together where needed. The idea like behind like this data, why I wanted to share it with you, is because my role at the Islamic Center at New York University was as the first Shia Muslim chaplain institution of higher education in the country. And you know, thereafter you have another 3 or 4 who are members of like part-time staff. Our center, the Islamic Center at NYU, is probably the largest center for Muslim student life in the United States or in North America. While most centers for Muslim student life in this country, they have 1 like full-time staff, we have 5 or 6 in addition to 3 or 4 part-time staff. While most centers for Muslim student life in this country, you know, like run their operations on a part-time basis, we run operations like 365 days a year. I could be in Riverside, California, and I know that like my office is running on its own without like any worry. And the number of students who reach out from across the country looking for support, looking for validation, looking for, you know, information, for insight, language around how they navigate university protocol and its realities and so on and so forth. You know, my email inbox is filled on a day-to-day basis with students who are reaching out looking for, you know, for avenues, many times Shia students who are looking for avenues, you know, to find like some independence, to find growth, to create like their own student group and whatnot. So I say all of this, you know, I just, you know, dump a whole bunch of information to get folks, you know, to just realize that the experiences on a day-to-day basis are difficult, they're challenging, and in a world where we're consistently speaking around like the importance of, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, many a times minority Muslim groups are consistently marginalized and isolated. It's really, really important to realize what privileges that we have so we can offer support toward those who oftentimes don't have that sense of support.
What do you say to a student who comes to you and is like, I don't feel accepted by my Muslim community here? What's that conversation like when they come to your office and tell you this and share this with you?
Yeah, this is the problem with me. I'm a pretty emotional guy, so I hate it, but I have that conversation almost every other day though, across the country, across the country. I think like COVID and like Zoom realities have really made those interactions easier. The first thing is to hear them, right? And to like validate their experiences. People go through like tough stuff, right? Like, my day-to-day work is as chaplain. I talk to, students every day, and every day I'm so, humbled by what it is that we often, or folks often go through, and particularly those who are minorities anyway, right? Think about like what, I know the majority of this room are undergrad students is my guess, right? Students go through a lot of stuff already, right? You have to go to class, you have part-time like work, you have family responsibilities. Some of you have to work multiple part-time jobs because you need to afford to pay for college and support like your families. In addition to that, you have like challenges with relationships, challenges with finances, challenges with mental health, challenges with your own physical health, right? There are things that, students have to go through that are already challenging. Now, if we add the layer of being a minority, right? Ethnic minority, and then we add another layer of being Muslim, where it's already really, really hard to be Muslim in a world filled with all of the Islamophobic rhetoric that we have to deal with. And we, are just hearing of a couple of wonderful candidates, sarcasm, who are going to be, running for president, in our upcoming election, right? Which are undoubtedly going to push forth like this Islamophobic rhetoric in this train. And then in addition to that being like a Shia Muslim, talk about layer after layer after layer. Just first thing when that student comes to me is to tell them, I understand, like I hear you, I'm sorry, but now how can I help you? What do you want? What can we assist you with? How can I push forth? How can I speak to whatever administrator on your campus? We'll figure it out, and it's been tiring, but it's been so rewarding to see, because I know just how difficult it is to be, an undergrad student with everything else going on. I experienced those same realities, and virtually whatever it takes to build, whatever it takes to grow, I'm there for it, and I'm down with this cause. And I know there's not a lot of people who are privileged enough to get paid to do the work that I love to do and that I believe in doing. So if that means my weekends, if that means me stepping away from my family, for the most part they're pretty okay with it. I'm happy to be of service.
And one of the challenges sometimes when you're in the position of privilege, when you're in the majority, you don't always know like what it's like to be the minority and what they're going through. So you gave an example of kind of when you were praying in undergrad. Could you give us a couple more examples of like what are our Shia students facing? Like what are some of those experiences or challenges that they're coming to you with? Because again, those of us that might be in the majority just may not know or may not be aware of.
Yeah, of course. I think on a more like practical level, to keep in mind like a couple of important points. Number one is there are differences in methodologies around like religious holidays. When is the beginning of the month of Ramadan, or when is the Eid holiday, right? That concludes the month of Ramadan. In Islamic law, there are differences of perspective with how we determine the beginning of the lunar month. And so because of these legal differences, everyone might be having Eid on a Friday, and another group of people might be having Eid on Saturday, right? Or on a Thursday and then a Friday. And then explaining that to like your professor, is a bit challenging, because they're gonna be like, well, a bunch of students just took off yesterday, why you shouldn't take off today? On the academic calendar that the university sends out, it says this day, and now you're asking me for this day. You have to explain yourself. No, well, I'm a religious minority, amongst this group, right? It's hard. It's not easy, right? So I'm literally sitting with a bunch of my students, Eid this year, according to like the calculative method that our Sunni community generally uses, is like through, ended up falling on a Friday, right? And so the Eid that the Eid that Shia Muslims generally follow, there's diversity of opinion just about everything when it comes to matters of Islamic law. This year fell on Saturday in New York because we follow a local moon sighting methodology. So it normally wouldn't be a problem because Saturday is a weekend anyway. But I have a large contingency of Shia dental students, medical students at NYU, the grad students, so they have to be in clinic and all this kind of thing on the weekend. And like they didn't show up to like my Eid prayer, so like I'm sending these guys like WhatsApp message like, hey, like guys, like where are you at, right? Yeah. And they literally said they're like it was too hard for us to tell like our clinical supervisors, when a bunch of our colleagues took off like the day before for us to take off. And I was like, this is your day, you have a right, And they're like, it is what it is, and we didn't want to have that conversation. It's hard, right? But at the end of the day, like imagine, right? You had to like work on Eid, right? I have to work on Eid, but it's fine, right? Like,
you're paid to do that.
I'm paid to do that, right? And so so this is just like one example, right? Another example is like differences in determining prayer time, right? And at the same time, how that would translate into like the time of iftar, during the month of Ramadan. I don't know how if you guys like host like iftars, on campus at all or whatever. And so in Shia law, the perspective around determination of like the Maghrib prayer is not at the time of sunset, but after like redness like in the western sky has like dissipated. So it's about 15 or 20 minutes later, and everyone's breaking their fast at 8 p.m. and you have like a small group of people who are sitting on the side, right, waiting for 8:20. It's uncomfortable, right? And then you have to explain it while someone has like a burger or taco in their mouth, right? They're like, why not eating? I'm like, well, I have to wait for prayer for 20 minutes. Again, of course I'm being sarcastic and making a joke about it, but it's not easy when you're one and everyone else is, doing what they're doing and you're 1 out of 100, or 1 out of 1,000. It hurts almost, right? The fact that, not that it hurts to practice the way that we practice, but it hurts that no one is realizing that your experience is different, So, those sorts of realities are of it. It's very, very, it's hurtful when, we put on a program that has to do with Shia Muslim experience in America, and there are going to be plenty of individuals who are like, oh, like, why are we doing this program? Why, I'm sure you must have, you or your team or people in the community over here, must have heard like resentment that we're putting out a program like this. Why do we need to do it? What's the point? This is not important. These challenges don't really exist, and so that hurts, right? And so it's, day after day, having to explain yourself, having to explain your practice in contrast with the privileged majority. All of that is tiring and it's burdensome, I do these talks all the time, right? I do it with a smile on my face, right? Generally try to be funny, try to be sarcastic, right? But at the end of the day, like and again, I appreciate everything that that you're doing and that your team has put together. But in all honesty, like no one like calls me to like ask me, like ask me to speak on my other areas of expertise, right? I studied Islamic theology and like Quranic science and hermeneutics for years. I don't get invited to like universities to speak like on Quranic sciences or on Islamic spirituality. I literally teach a course on Islamic spirituality at New York University, right? Ask me how many times a Center for Muslim Student Life or university has invited me to come and give a talk like on that subject, right? No, they're going to invite like my Sunni counterpart to do that, right? But I'm going to be asked to like give a talk like on what it means to be a Shia Muslim, So it's tiring, right? I do it, right? I've literally written my research on it, and I'm totally good to do it, and I realize that I'm poised to do it, and I'm privileged enough to do it, and I have to be like a spokesperson for my community, and I'm totally good doing it. But what hurts for me is like looking at my students wherever I go and realizing that they have to like be a representative of their religious practice every single day. Imagine your professor saw that you came from X part of the world and consistently asked you, right? You became the token spokesperson for that, for that country where your family comes from, right? Where even though you grew up over here, or you become the token sort of spokesperson for all Muslims because you happen to be Muslim, You're not an expert like on Islam, and if you are, great, right? But if you're not, you don't want to carry that burden, It doesn't feel good. And so
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, right? And again, we're talking about all of these layers of obstacles and challenges, and then you throw that one on the minority, Muslim student, on the Shia Muslim student, right? And it becomes even more challenging and more burdensome.
And thank you for that. So a lot of times you hear American Muslims saying like, you know, what, like you kind of mentioned it, right? Like, why are we having this talk about Shia Muslim experiences? Like, we're all one. We're all one community. We're all one religion, and we want to we should focus on unity and what brings us together. So, how do you feel when people tell you that? How do you respond to people who say like, why are we focusing on the differences? Let's focus on what we like unite on.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, and I know that oftentimes comes from like a really sincere place. You know, I really believe that most people they don't see that they're not aware, not understanding. But it is exactly what it is to tell, you know, someone who's black in this country that like, oh, like I'm colorblind, I don't see color, right? Because that what you're doing is you're dismissing someone's experiences when you say something like that, you know. And to take a look and see what Shia Muslims experience across the world, you know, where probably every single individual who is Shia Muslim in this country, you know, whether they were, you know, a convert to this tradition or they were born into it, no matter how many generations they were in the United States, or if their family are immigrants to this country, can probably trace back toward one individual that they know that was like imprisoned, that was killed, that was a victim of like, you know, genocide, impacted, you know, their life taken away because they identified as Shia Muslim, right? And I just mentioned, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan as like 3 countries where this is like a, you know, reality consistently. Nigeria, right? Like this is a reality for like my community across the world, you know? And again, like I said before, that is consistently like impacting the psyche and the psychology of, you know, young people who identify with this religious tradition today. And so you can't tell someone, you know, just, you know, shed the labels, right? It's not about that. You don't need to, you know, call yourself Shia Muslim, just call yourself Muslim, right?
Yeah.
Right? That again is being so dismissive of like the Shia Muslim American reality, the Shia Muslim reality, you know? You can't do that, you know? Of course, no one, you're not going to call yourself like Sunni Muslim. I give this assignment on the first day of class to every class that I teach. It's an identity exercise. I'm sure that you're familiar with it, you know? I tell all the students, and maybe some of you have experienced this, I tell all my students on the first day of class to explain themselves or introduce themselves toward their classmates by writing down their 5 most salient identities. Okay? You know what I'm talking about, right? And so everyone goes, I give them 10 minutes to think about it, right? They're all writing down their 5 most salient identities, and then I ask them to share. And one common theme that I've consistently seen almost every single time, I've probably done this, you know, I've done this more than a dozen times, and, you know, 99% of the time, everyone who is black will write down black, number 1. Everyone who is Muslim will write down Muslim. Everyone who is a woman will write down woman, right? Those who are white, they don't write down white. Those who are male, they don't write down male. Those who are Christian don't write down Christian, right? Because we live in a world that's dominated by white male Christian privilege, right? So they're not going to see that as a salient part of their identity, right? But if you're black, you know that that's a salient part of your identity. If you're a minority religion outside of Christianity, you know that's a salient part of your identity. You know, and if you're a woman, you realize that you know, we live in a male-dominated, you know, privileged society. And I don't say anything. I give them this assignment. It consistently comes up. Then I ask the students, "What did you realize?" And quickly, it will be the white male student will say, "Wait a minute. I realized that I didn't write down that I was white, and everyone else wrote down that they're brown, that they're black, that they're this, they're that." And they'll also say like, "Oh, you know, everyone else spoke about their religion, but I didn't like speak to my religion, even though I'm a practicing believer in my Christianity, for instance." Well, why did you write that down? I didn't think of it as a salient part of my identity. Why not? You know? And quickly we realize again, and again, no blame on them, right? But that is why when someone says, or utilizes language like, why don't you just call yourself Muslim? Well, again, because this has become such a salient part of our identity, because we're always reminded that we're different, you know? So that's, that's on that front. I will say this point also to your question. Unity is really, really important, And unity does not mean like uniformity, like we know. It doesn't mean that I need to practice, or that we need to practice the same. I'm in no way, speaking poorly to like my fellow, Sunni Muslim like sisters and brothers, So please don't take it that way. I know sometimes, people haven't heard language like this, so they get very quickly offended. No, you should practice the way, that you accept and the way that you realize, and that's totally fine, You believe what you believe, and that's great, At the end of the day, you can't, though, create opportunities for me to conform toward your perspective on religion, That's not fair for anyone. What we can do to unite and to work together is by having conversations like this one. What we can do is realize that in the larger, like, Muslim American, like, experience, we are what, like 3%, 3 to 5% of the population in the country. Is that correct, Professor?
I would say 1 to 3.
1 to 3%, okay. So 1 to 3%. So what does that amount to? Less than a million, or sorry, 3 million Muslims in 3 to 5.
3 to 5. So.
Okay. So 3 to 5 to 7 million Muslims in America. In the big picture, that's like insignificant, right? Like it's very, very small. But what we can, like, and now if we start to break it down further, right? We break it down by theological school, we break it down by jurisprudential school, we break it down by race and ethnicity, like most of our mosques and Islamic centers across this country, right? That's only going to fragment our communities like further. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't like be part of a cultural group. You should not be part of your theological group. No, I'm not saying that. You should. But where we can work together is in doing like the meaningful work that we need to, There's like homelessness in Riverside, California, like there's homelessness in New York City. We as a Muslim community can come to the forefront, work together, right? We believe, in a lot of similarities. We believe in common core values. Let's work together and be united in terms of those social services. Like was mentioned in the biography, I'm a board member of the first shelter for first domestic violence shelter catering toward survivors of domestic violence, within the Muslim community in New York City, right? And I'm humbled and I'm privileged to be a part of this, incredible project. We put aside like our, theological, and jurisprudential differences, get together and realize that this is a gap in the larger Muslim community. Domestic violence, sexual abuse is a real concern. So we need to be at the forefront, members and individuals who, speak about faith and matters of religion and spirituality on a day-to-day basis to come to the forefront to fill a gap, right? And so we have Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, Muslims across different ethnic backgrounds coming together, putting down their wealth, putting down their resources, so we can put together and build like this shelter, for instance. And I think that, we should absolutely be united, right? But not uniform in the way that we practice. If anything, it shows a strength in our diversity if we're able to actualize and realize and appreciate the fact that we have our differences, respectively.
And that kind of leads me to the last question before we pose some questions from the audience. But how can spaces like ours, like the Middle Eastern Student Center, or student organizations like the Muslim Student Association, or other organizations, and any other relevant kind of institutions, the university as a whole, how can we better support our Shia Muslim populations?
Yeah, I think like number one, like representation, right? Representation goes a really long way, And like I was mentioning to you before the program, for a lot of Shia Muslims and sort of minority groups, when there is even the least bit of representation, we get really, really excited, I remember like when, I'm like a big basketball fan. You guys Lakers fans? You're a big game fan. I'm a Knicks fan, so it's not like that.
I'm a Warriors fan. So
Yeah, you're a Warriors fan.
We're both kind of.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, you have a couple of rings.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
forget that.
Yeah. But like, what was it like? Morocco was like in like the final.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like
in the
yeah,
World Cup,
in the World Cup, right? Like, you're like Muslims everywhere. They're like so excited, right? Like Middle Easterners in America are all united on this one thing. Everyone wants like Morocco to like be successful and do it. Why? Because we relate on this like manifestation of like identity politics. So representation really matters. It's like having an event like this is important. Having staffing on your team is important. Having a board member in a Muslim student group who is Shia to advocate for Shia Muslim needs, having a board member who is Black, who can advocate for Black Muslim student needs, that's important because that representation goes a long way, you know? I would say that's number one. Number two is to like hear and to understand, you know? And that's oftentimes the hardest thing for people to do, but like have like listening sessions, you know? Get people together, create like safe spaces for people to like share like what their experiences are. Because sometimes when we hear what other people like go through and what their experiences are, it humbles us and gets us to realize and understand oftentimes just how privileged that we are. And we realize like, wait a minute, like I didn't know that they like go through those experiences. I didn't know that this person has that, you know, going on in their life. I didn't know, and that all of a sudden, hopefully, you know, our hearts are clean enough to realize that, wait a minute, like I should be now at the forefront of advocating for them, speaking and supporting them, you know? And then I think like, you know, like universities, and hopefully more broadly, can put like resources like behind advocating for, you know, minority like Muslim, you know, or Shia Muslim student needs as well. You know, we have an increase these days in centers for Muslim student life. Like I'm sure that there are centers for, you know, Middle Eastern, you know, student life as well that are popping up across the country. Again, in the name of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's an opportunity to create like conversations on this front. But oftentimes, if someone is hiring like a Muslim chaplain or, you know, a Muslim, I don't know, spiritual life advisor or whatever, it's often going to be to the neglect of, you know, the Black Muslim student experience, the Shia Muslim student experience. And I think that, you know, we need to be vocal about making sure that we have people who are representative of like the demographics of that which they're serving, or at the very least, individuals who are aware of the diversity of, you know, Muslim experience in America.
I want to leave you with one more question, sorry. But
Yeah.
what's your message to, you know, students here or others who are Shia Muslim and feeling kind of that invalidation that you were kind of talking about and feeling, you know, disappointed and just kind of going through it?
Yeah.
Like what is your message to those students and to those of us kind of in that situation?
Yeah, number one, I would say that I get it, like it sucks, right? It's hard. But you, like everyone else, has like a right and have and has a place to belong. And you are afforded today like different opportunities than you were 10 or 15 years ago. And if it's any source of support, whatever I can do, I will go above and beyond to help establish, to help build, to help grow. If you are committed toward growing and building and creating a better future for students after you, because it might not happen so quickly in your time, then reach out to me and I will, you know, exert myself in whatever way that I possibly can to help build an avenue on your campus, in your community, to support Shia Muslim students. And I mean that with all sincerity. It's not like just, you know, words. You know, I like to say often that, you know, obviously I'm a believer in religious tradition. My background is in faith and theology, and I believe that, you know, God put me in a position then to, you know, to help and to support, not to utilize like my name or my position only in ways that are self-serving, but really to hopefully serve and you know, in Islamic spirituality, leadership is not like this hierarchical, like top-down approach, you know. Rather, it's leadership starts with like servitude, servitude to God, and servitude to others. And if I commit to this process of being a leader within my community, then I have to look for avenues where I can be of service. And I hopefully this is my niche, and hopefully I'm able to continue to help and support. So if you are, know that I'm ready to help, and I'm ready to build, and I'm ready to commit myself and my time to support you by the will of God.
On that note, I know we're going to be take some time for questions from folks. So if we have anyone that wants to ask a question, so we'll start with Dima, and then we'll go to Dima. You want to introduce yourself and and ask your question.
Okay, so hi, I'm Dima. I am a second year at UCR. I'm Lebanese, fully Lebanese. I am Sunni though, but I do have family members that married somebody that is Shia, right? They call him sushi. So how would their kids, like, what are they gonna practice? Are they gonna follow the man, like their kids, or are they gonna follow, like, what are they gonna practice in your opinion? How would they do that? How would it work? You know, with all respect here. No, like, discrimination at all. Like, it,
I have no idea.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
that's going to be like their decisions and
Yeah.
how they kind of decide to like raise their children and what they're committed to in terms of like religious practice. And I will say this, that like once we accept and like own the fact that like there are differences in practice, differences in theological belief, and jurisprudential belief, and spiritual ethical like understanding across different sects of Islam, things are a lot easier like to digest and to understand. I think why we oftentimes have like conflicts in the way that we do, or debates or discussions that are so rigorous, is because we're always trying to conform, right? And we don't need to, you know? But fundamentally, I have no idea, like, how they, I'm just trying to fill up some time over here.
yeah, I literally don't have no idea how
I
they
mean, it's
would do that.
gonna be their decision.
Maybe,
you know,
yeah.
their level of their
Okay.
practice and whatnot, so.
Assalamu alaikum. So,
Introduce yourself.
my name is Muhammad Muazzin. I'm an alumni, graduated last year. And so I myself am Shia. Back when I was at UCR, one of the hardest parts when it came to kind of bringing to light not only sort of the Shia identity, but especially when it came to on-campus organizing, was not only where to start the conversation, but kind of overcoming this conversation of who was qualified, quote unquote. So I want to kind of get your background or your experience on, when, especially with students, when, we're literally here, we're just simply learning about our majors, we're all already learning about our own faiths. Where do you think that, if Shia students, if they want to get more integrated into the MSAs on campus or to the Muslim community, where should those conversations start? Because a lot of times, it goes immediately into the controversies of Shi'ism, from Latmiyyah to Tawassul to things like that. So where do you think that conversation should start? And do you think that there should be an intermediary, or are students capable of having that conversation by themselves?
That's a good question. Like, if you take a look, I mean, the overwhelming majority of Muslim student groups in American college campuses, what type of programs do they put on?
Social programs.
Social programs,
Yeah.
right? We're going bowling, we're gonna eat pizza, we're gonna have donuts, we're gonna go for coffee, we're gonna like have this Ramadan iftar. The minute, right, that there's like a Shia Muslim student like who wants to like be a board member, all of a sudden everyone's an expert like on religious theology and practice. We can't have like, what are we like? I would say, wait a minute. I'm not trying to like intrude on terms of your social programming. I just also want to go bowling with you. And if you don't want to go bowling with me, well, I'll just create my own student group and we'll go bowling together, right? Every single student has a right, Everyone pays tuition, you pay whatever fees that you pay, and if you want to be part of a student group, right, you have that right, especially if you identify like with that group. Of course, if you don't, then they're discounted you, then you start your own student group, right? Like you pay tuition, and you have a right to like, be who you are. All of a sudden, I see this all the time, right? It's tragic, right? You do not have to speak like on matters of theology, You can reach out to me, you can reach out to others, there are like resources online, that I can connect you to, that I can share with others, one-on-one books and stuff like that, podcasts, whatever it is. But for some reason, if the majority of like the programming that is done like by Muslim student groups is social programming, or like, I don't know, just if there are like theological differences, then just host programs that everyone like is kind of, like down for, so to say, It shouldn't be that complicated, in other words, And I think a lot of times the conversation should just start with, hey, I think it's important for us to have a Shia Muslim board member because there are Shia Muslim students on campus, and they have like a right to like participate in programming like this one, and they also like want to feel a sense of belonging, you know? And and again, if they're not including you, then that's it. Start your own student group, you know? Sorry, that sounds a bit radical.
I don't know if anyone wants to go.
Let's see if anyone else has a question. Yeah, introduce yourself.
Salam Sheikh.
Thank you, Salam.
My name is Amir. We met at the space conference briefly.
Yeah, familiar,
Yeah.
right?
I didn't attend UCR. We drove out 2 hours just to come see you, Sheikh.
You're
But
very kind.
I had a question. So obviously there's like an ideological component in Iman, right? Like there's accepting that what I believe is logical. There's accepting that my faith is logical. That's a key part of faith. But also like there's a very key, I think, social aspect.
Sure.
Like there's as humans, like we're social creatures. We look for confirmation. We look for affirmation in our circles. And unfortunately, in many parts of this country, you don't have Shia social circles. You don't have Shia groups. You don't have any support systems. So how is it that like we can maintain? Because I've personally dealt with this. But how is it that we can like keep like an unshakable iman? Like how can we like prevent this like social isolation from affecting our belief system and affecting our ideology and what we hold to be true?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it is really challenging. I think that there are like social circles and social avenues, but because of just the sheer numbers that we are, they're often much harder to find. Which is why, and again, I'm so humbled. Like that's why I'm going to come out to like California, because these guys drove 2 hours, and thank you for doing that. It's really about finding like a small like community, even if it just be a few people who are able to like validate like your experiences. How meaningful is it when you had a bad day and you come on in anything that you did, right? And someone comes and like, just tells you about like how their day, you go and you tell someone about how awful your day was, and they don't like ask you questions, they just listen to you. The majority of my work is as chaplain, right? So I have like students who come to me and they go through like really real like challenges, right? And my meetings generally are like 45 minutes. Other day I had someone who came into my office and she is like, in tears, she's weeping, and she's like, she's gone through a lot, she's had a really tough life, she's had really tough like last week, she's sitting in my office, and I'm sitting over there, and I was like, how can I help you? She just goes off, right? And out of the 45 minutes of like our meeting schedule, she speaks for 40 minutes and I speak for 5, okay? And out of the 5 minutes that I'm speaking, the majority of my words are, I'm so sorry to hear that. Thank you. Can I get you water? Do you need more tissues? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So on and so forth, right? So maybe it's like 42.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes. At the end of the meeting, in spite of everything that you just told me, how horrific her experience is, she's like, thank you so much. This was like you have changed my life. I was like, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I literally just sat there and just said yes and no and I'm sorry, and I affirmed what it is that you went through, right? In my mind, I'm not saying that to her, but that's exactly what I just did. But for her, I changed her life, And the same goes for me. Someone's listening to me, and I appreciate them so much just for hearing and saying, yes, I know, I've been there before. That kind of rhetoric, right? So I think, to find and to look and to search and to live in and to move to, right? And to identify that like sense of community is so important, right? It's so important. And I would extend that. I don't know if you're a student, undergrad, grad, or whatever. On campus, no matter though like we live like on top of each other and next to each other, you have roommates and whatever. I work in New York City, and I lived in New York City for many years until like the pandemic. Then I moved out to the suburbs. How many of you have ever been to New York City before? New York City has a lot of people, right? People who say that they're lonely, the percentages of people who say that they're lonely in New York City are incomparable with any other major city in the world, like data suggests. How can you be lonely with that many people? Because having friendship and having community is not only with the numbers of people, right? But having real interactions with people, particularly those who share similar values to you. And oftentimes when there's too many, it's often hard for us to find that like real connection one-to-one. So we have to look for it, we have to strive for it, and you know, you have to talk to people, and you have to reach out to people to connect you to others, and don't be shy, and don't be embarrassed. And coming to events like this, that's what it does, right? It creates that sense of community, or it creates that sense of validation. You're able to hear and, you know, experience and talk to and connect with people who have those events like that space conference that we did however many months ago, right? They're so important because they're catering to a very specific demographic, people coming all across the country to find community. They're not coming for like the networking aspect. They're not coming for, they are maybe a small minority of them. They say that's what they're coming for, but in reality, we're trying to fill this void that we have like within ourselves, which is we just want to be with people who are similar to me. They understand me. I don't need to pretend. I don't need to explain, you know? And so keep on working at it. Keep on identifying, because undoubtedly it's making an imprint on our hearts as well.
Thank you.
Other question?
Salam. My name is Aksa. I'm also a Shia student on the UCR campus. My question for you is, as a student myself and being part of different student organizations on campus, like MSA, sometimes it gets exhausting advocating for yourself.
Yeah.
So what is a piece of advice that you have, and what's kind of kept you going in your journey of trying to battle being exhausted but also still wanting to be represented, like a representation for other Shia Muslims?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. It is exhausting. It is tiring. But I also know, like, most importantly, that like I'm not created in this world just to like find peace and comfort and contentment. There's something like more to life, and if that means like exerting myself, exhausting myself, I'm gonna do it. You know, I have 2 children. They're, you know, my older daughter, she just became 8 last week. My younger one, she's gonna be 6 in a couple of weeks, and you know, they don't like when I like have to travel to California for one day. I'm literally going back home tonight. Came back, you know, I got back home until 1 a.m. Right, I'm gonna leave at 10 p.m. because I have other meetings to like go to. Like my kids to go see tomorrow evening and stuff like that. But I have to tell them that like hey, like I have to do this, right? Because if I don't do it, then like who's gonna do it? You know, there's trash on the ground. Everyone can look at the trash and say like, who's gonna pick up the trash? You know, like why don't you just pick up the trash and put it in the trash, and put it in the trash can? And why are you always waiting for someone else to do it? You know? So I find like some like inspiration like every morning when I look at my children. I find like some like validation and like understanding that like I'm a Muslim and I come from, you know, an individual, or I take inspiration from the best of creation, and that's the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family. And I say like, he was busy, he was tired, he had a big family, he had like his own like personal like prayers and acts of worship and whatever to engage in. That never stopped him from like going out and like doing like, you know, what he has to do. There's a time for me, right? And I make that time and I carve out that time and like I'll do what I have to do, but I'm not gonna like fall into like this, you know, very like postmodern like ism that like every day is like a day for me, right? No, like that's not what life is about. Every day is a day for everyone else. And sometimes I'll get those days for me. I'll get those times for me, you know? And so, you know, I'm sure you're really busy. I'm sure everybody's really busy. You know, I have like a pretty packed like Google Calendar myself, you know? Today's Thursday, like I still have to work today, you know? And I still have like responsibilities. But I'm gonna make sure that I'm carving out my time, putting forth my best effort, making sure that I'm consistently seeing like the end goal and end objective of what it is that I'm working toward. And I know that even if that doesn't materialize, you know, in my day, or I don't see like the impact of it, I know it's going to leave a long lasting impact, right? You know, it's humbling, right? It's like, honestly, I'm not trying to like, you know, say this, you know, in any sort of like arrogant way, but it's like so humbling that I have, you know, people who have told me, now 3 people who have told me that they drove like 2 hours like to come and like listen to like this, you know? That means that like the work is getting out, the words are getting out there, right? And the impact is being made, you know? Or the fact that someone remembers like a talk that I gave at a conference, you know, a year ago. That to me is incredible and so humbling and so validating, you know? So that type of stuff keeps me going, you know? So keep pushing, keep fighting the good fight. And you know, this should not be like the source of our inspiration, but like we come from a community that is like terribly like marginalized, right? I know family members of mine who have been in prison. I have, stories in my extended family and members of my community who tell me about how their family members were killed. Ethnic cleansing that is taking place, genocides in some parts of the world, and so on and so forth. And I look within myself, like, what am I complaining about? I went to like arcade coffee this morning. And I'm complaining about making like a 8-hour like flight. I had a stopover. That's my biggest like problem. Like trying to direct a flight from New York to Ontario. I was like, what am I complaining about? And if my words can get out, and I really believe, right? I not to keep on like going off on your question, but like I really believe that if we can like influence like geopolitics elsewhere, like from this country and from like our language and rhetoric, in the long term, and so I gotta do what I gotta do, and you play your part, and I'll play mine, and collectively we'll do what we have to do.
And I'll add to that. You never know when you're planting a seed. Like you never know when you're reaching out and saying something. I know for us, the Middle Eastern Student Center, it's taken some of our Shia students to like kind of have those difficult conversations with us and be like, we want to see more of you all, and we want you to. And some people that are in this room right now have been part of that process and challenged us. And it wasn't easy to hear.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to hear that you're not doing well, that you could do more, that you can be better. But it made an impact. And I think that's part of why we're here today, is because of the advocacy from students, that made this a reality for today. So you never know. One conversation, one mention, one moment might spark something later on. You might not see the results immediately, but later on it could happen.
And how many as like a center, you're putting on this program. It's on live, right? You see people post on social media. How many other opportunities are gonna like be created, or how many folks' imagination is going to start to brew to say, like, hey, we need to do this on our campus just because of your efforts, just because of your students' efforts years ago. They advocated for you to do this. So there's a trickle-down effect in all of our work. So sometimes we don't see, and I think that we live in a world of like instant gratification. We want the result like now. Like, why would I wait for a line for my coffee and order for my phone, right? Like you don't want that. Like, but in reality, everything takes its time and its due course. So thanks for taking for utilizing your privilege and your leadership to put this together. It means a lot.
And thank you so much for coming today and for your amazing contributions to the communities that for all our communities. And we're gonna have to end it here so we can make sure we have time for tacos and be out of here by 5:30. Yeah. But thank you again so much for your time, Dr. Sheikh Faiyaz, and it's been a pleasure to meet you. I've been following the work of ICNUIU. A lot of our support that we do for Muslim students here at MESC, at UCR, we're learning from you all. And like when I share with our professors and faculty about how to support our Muslim students on campus, here's what you need to do for Ramadan, I send them videos of these guys and like of the work that they're doing. So thank you all.
Be a help, and that will learn from you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you all just make a plate for make a plate, and then but yeah, well, we do have to be out of this room pretty quickly, so maybe just kind of grab your plate, hang out, be ready to. Hopefully nobody kicks us out immediately, but we can kind of hang out. So don't get too comfortable.
Yeah, I know.
We came from my workplace. You want to become a chaplain, so how are you?
Wait. What are you doing?
I mean, from a very, very